When I was 11, I got sent for the first and only time to the psych ward. This was when I was in middle school. I hated middle school, and in fact, I was so adamant and vocal about my hatred of middle school that my fellow students had discovered that the easiest way to annoy me was by repeatedly asking me whether or not I liked it. So, when one day my bus driver asked me the same question, I could only perceive it as a threat. Enraged, I knocked his glasses off. I maintain to this day that he was deliberately egging me on, but what's the word of a clearly disturbed child against that of a grown employee? The man was unhurt, and even his glasses were unshattered, but the school authorities were so alarmed that they threatened to have me arrested for assault. In response, and trying to teach me a lesson, my parents agreed to drive me instead over to the local psych ward. There, the doctors quickly determined that I was not dangerous to myself or others, so I was home by evening. After that incident, my parents pulled me out of school for at least a month. I'd been diagnosed with sensory integration disorder when I was 3 and Asperger syndrome when I was 9. While during my childhood, my symptoms could usually pass for normal quirkiness, by middle school, it was obvious how different I really was. The paperwork I found from that time portrays a pathetic picture indeed. My social skills are described as horrendous, and my ability to organize appears non-existent. Piles of paper and supplies overflowed my various desks, spreading even onto the desks of my classmates. I got in trouble constantly for blurting things out, for losing assignments, for being off task, and in the most severe incident until the glasses debacle, for throwing a textbook at a boy who had been teasing me. I had not intended to hit him, as indicated by the fact that I didn't. I only wanted him to leave me alone. Shortly after that point, I found a theater. And despite the fact that acting was a pretty incongruous choice for someone so obviously lacking in social skills, I decided that I wanted to give it a go. My first real role in an actor's rep production of The Velveteen Rabbit was as a tree. Yes, really. In my next show, I played a pig, then Humpty Dumpty the oversized egg, but eventually I did start playing humans. Once I began to get over my outsized anxiety about acting, I discovered that, oddly enough, I was actually pretty good at it. After all, I'd already been trying to act normal my entire life. My favorite high school role was in a play called Columbinus, which explored the causes and consequences of the 1999 Columbine massacre. It was an emotionally draining production to be a part of, but my director believed that putting on the play could increase the audience's awareness of social issues, like poor gun control and rampant school bullying, that contributed to the tragedy, thus decreasing the chances that it would happen again. In his oft-repeated rehearsal mantra, we were telling a story that needed to be told. However, I did eventually realize that my nerves were a little too unsteady for me to seriously consider acting as a career. Since I still wasn't ready to end my love affair with the theater, I gradually switched my focus to playwriting and ended up getting accepted to the prestigious NYU Tisch. My first year as a student there was exhilarating. I was excited by the things I was learning and the buzz of the city, and I had a built-in social group of the other freshmen on my themed explorations floor. But during my sophomore year, things quickly deteriorated. I didn't manage to stay close to any of my first-year friends and felt completely invisible in the huge, sprawling school in an even more gargantuan city. I dealt with this isolation and depression in one of the worst ways I possibly could, by starving myself. I was pretty overweight at the time, but it still didn't take very long for my brain to start turning to absolute mush. I lost interest in pretty much anything besides scrolling through Tumblr for inspiration, anything definitely including my classes. By By my brief trip home over our fall break, I was around 15 pounds lighter than I began the term, and by the end of it, I decided to drop out. Plenty of people blamed this turning event on my asperger's, but nobody blamed my eating disorder. I probably wouldn't have even said I had an eating disorder. After all, it's not like I was thin. Moving back home did little to improve matters. Without the external structure of school, losing weight was really the only thing I had to hold on to. By the time I resumed my studies at Florida Atlantic University's honors campus, I was objectively pretty thin, but I was still obsessed with getting even thinner, despite the fact that my relationship with food had become completely chaotic. I'd spend as many as 5 days in a row eating almost nothing while living on campus, then spend the weekends at my parents' house binging on junk food for as many as 3 nights straight. This time, I somehow managed to keep going through the motions in my classes, but I felt totally disconnected from the world and from myself. So, instead of, going to therapy or anything else a sane person might do, I decided to start a theater club. We ended up calling ourselves Theater in the Raw, and our first full-length production was The Glass Menagerie, which I'd loved since I first read it in my high school Acting 1 class. One of the characters, Laura, had been one of the only fictional characters I had ever actually related to. She was not just shy, but terribly shy, peculiar, different from other girls. Laura's high school crush, Jin, gives Laura the nickname Blue Roses, and in one memorable scene near the end of the play, he tells her that despite the fact that blue is wrong for roses, it's right for her. To me, that line represents finding beauty in what is broken, how disorder can be salvaged and even elevated, how it is possible to appreciate someone who diverges from the norm, not only in spite of their difference, but in fact because of it. And yet, remarkably enough, in Theater in the Raw's production of The Glass Menagerie, I didn't play Laura. I played her overbearing mother, Amanda. And unfortunately for me, Amanda had a hell of a lot more lines. A month of rehearsal can feel scant at the best of times. For busy, inexperienced college students trying to put on a dense, nuanced Tennessee Williams masterpiece, the task seemed to border on the impossible. My relationship with food and my feelings about my body were still as fucked up as ever, but at least I had found something of a community in our ragtag gang of cast and crewmates. And in our near nightly rehearsal, I had found some place where I was valued for my talent and insight rather than my appearance. A place where I could use my artistic energy to contribute to something beautiful instead of putting it all towards self-destruction. When I left undergrad, I was still a complete mess, and there are many ways in which I'm still a complete mess now. And yet I feel like I wouldn't be out of line in saying that in many ways the theater really did save me, or maybe even create me. It helped transform me from a self-absorbed middle school nobody into someone passionate, empathetic, and socially conscious, and introduced me to a slew of incredible people along the way. Then, when I was more lost in my own head than ever, Theater in the Raw gave me some thread of humanity to follow back to myself. Our silly little shows reminded me what it was to care about something besides myself and my overprivileged problems, and that I was the kind of person who felt most like herself when she was telling stories that needed to be told. Thank you.